So what I'm wanting to do today is to focus on basically the physical geography of Palestine, the Holy Land. Now straight away we see or Israel, so we're going to trip over all those issues, try and put them aside. The Holy Land is actually bigger than Israel and or Palestine because it also includes Jordan and parts of southern Lebanon and really into Damascus, up into Syria as far as Damascus, and technically go the Old Testament down as far as Egypt, because that's part of the story. But if we're talking about the primary geographical focus, then the traditional way of saying is from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean. That's Palestine geographically. In political terms, it's Israel and Palestine. Although the eastern side of the Jordan Creek, because that's what it is really, we call it a river, it has always been part of the biblical land, but now politically it's in a country called Jordan, which the Brits created in about 1928, because they were giving jobs to each of their Arab friends. And they made one of them king of Saudi Arabia, they made another one king of Iraq, and they took one of the people from this Hashemite family and made that person king of Transjordan, king of the other side of Jordan, other side of the Jordan River. And it was part of the British plan to control the Middle East forever. And we all know how well that went. It's 1948, it all came crumbling down around their ears. So there's a bit of fluidity, as it were, about what is the Holy Land, but I'm going to focus primarily on the country of Israel, the landscapes of Israel and Palestine, and the sort of the eastern edge of the Jordan River. Give you a bit of a glimpse down in the desert as well. So why does this stuff matter? Well, landscape, along with weather patterns and climate, are there for the long haul. They last like forever. Now we know it's not forever, but once upon a time Australia was either connected to Africa or South America. I can't remember which bit we fit into with continental drift. That was so long ago that nobody remembers it. So even in terms of hundreds of thousands of years of human presence, the way the land looks in the eastern Mediterranean today is more or less how it has looked for the last 500,000 years and longer. So it's a given. Okay? Right there, come in. So it's in place for thousands, millions of years. It actually sets up the stage. You can do stuff, and you can only do stuff in this landscape that works with the soil, with the amount of rain, and with the amount of other kinds of water and so on. So if you don't have forests, or if you don't have big rivers, if you don't have natural harbours, all of those things are going to impact on what you do in this country. Okay? Of course, it can be modified, and the main ways that humans have modified it is trade. If someone is going to make money out of something, they'll find a way to make it happen. Okay? So if from time to time this bit of dirt has been on some significant trade routes, it's not at the moment. Why is it not at the moment? Because we have different technology. So we're not having to bring spices from India across to the Mediterranean coast by camel and then load them on ships and send them on to Rome. It comes other ways. So that's significant. And all the economic activity that goes with that particular trade has vanished because of technology. Similarly, once they developed the technology of iron working, they were able to cut cisterns in the limestone mountains in the middle of the country. And limestone mountains are not much good for farming. They're also very dry. They've got rain a couple of times a year. Around about 1200, they mastered iron working, and they were able to cut cisterns in the rock, capture the rainwater, and hold it through the dry season. Then you can farm up there the kind of stuff you can farm on a dry, hilly landscape. Olives, particularly, grow well in that kind of area. If your country happens to be on the border, on the frontier of an empire, the government in the capital city is going to invest in your region. We know this. Okay, why is there money being spent in Darwin? Okay, because it's strategically important that Australia have defence facilities up on the northwest we don't have similar fortifications worrying about New Zealand. Okay? But, we are fortifying that edge. There's hardly anybody living up there, but we're spending a lot of money on defence infrastructure because it's the frontier. We're not spending money in the middle of the country because there's no strategic reason to do that. So when Palestine is in the middle of an empire, like the Roman Empire, which is much bigger, it doesn't get much attention from Rome. But when it becomes a border, a frontier state, then whichever empire is in power at the time is a bit more interested in what happens in Palestine. And when people chop down so many trees that they, in fact, take out all the trees from the landscape, then we have deforestation and we have deserts formed by human as a consequence of human activity. And that's what wiped out the Roman cities in North Africa, and they became desert. Because we cut down so many trees that we created the Sahara Desert. Okay? Those used to be thriving, firstly Phoenician, then Greek, and then Roman cities. So we can make a difference to the landscape, but only within certain parameters. You can't go ice skating, basically, in the Sinai. It's never going to work. There's never going to be enough snow to do it. Okay? So this is the area we're looking at, and in particular, we're looking at the only bit we're really discussing is this area from about here, maybe down here we talk about the Negev, but from here up to where you see the white bits there, that's the mountains of Lebanon. So that area there is what we're talking about. And up around us, of course, you've got Egypt, across here you've got Mesopotamia. Today it's Iran and Iraq. In the ancient times it was Babylon, Persia, so on. And the two great powers were the sort of river civilizations here, including the Assyrians up in the north, and the Egyptians. And these guys, when they wanted to go and attack the enemy in the north, whose backyard did they walk through? Because they didn't have aircraft carriers and they didn't have planes, so they had to move their soldiers. And they're not going to come through the desert, they're going to go up the coast. And they're going to feed their armies by taking your crops, thank you very much, and raping the women that are in the villages and so on. And when these guys are on a roll, and they're pushing their influence as far as the Mediterranean, and they decide to come down and teach the Egyptians a lesson, they're going to come down the same coast, through the same villages, take the food off the same fields, and attack Egypt. So, and nobody who's lived here has ever been powerful enough to have an empire that can go the other way. You just don't have the resources here that you get here with the Nile, or you get over here. The huge human civilizations developed 4,000 or 5,000 years BCE, and the biblical story of being in the land only starts around about 1200 or 1000 BCE. Okay, but these other empires have been going already for 4,000 years when David and Solomon perhaps start doing something here. So these are very much sort of, this is always the backyard of somebody else's empire. It's never the capital of an empire. There aren't enough people, there's not enough land, you can't develop enough wealth to develop the kind of power which would let you project out. So you're always going to be on the receiving end of other people's imperial ambitions. Conversely, we're so far away from everywhere that basically nobody ever attacks Australia because we're at the end of the railway line and there wasn't a railway line. But I mean, it's a long way to go to attack a very big country when the bit facing Asia is not very hospitable. So we've got the reverse because of our geography. We have a sign. So we have Fortress Australia because of our geography. They have sort of welcomed, in effect, this area, Palestine, Canaan, Israel, call it what you like, it's a bridge. And people walk over the bridge and they trash the place on their way. And this shows you some of that. We won't go into all the details, but this is just showing how over a couple of thousand years, everybody, so whether your empire is based in Egypt or in Greece, which today is part of which we call Turkey, or whether your empire is based in the sort of that part of the Middle East that is still so problematic to us, from Afghanistan through to Iran, to Iraq, that area of the world, guess what? It was a problem 3,000 years ago as well. And they're not actually trying to, they don't care. this is irrelevant. There's nothing there to capture. But it's a strategic access to get to the other guys. Okay? So, let's have a look at the Eastern Mediterranean. As we know, it's basic. We're going to talk about its basic geographical features, which are particularly the southern half of the Eastern Mediterranean has no natural harbours. So the people that live there are not going to build boats and explore the Mediterranean. Tiny bit further in Lebanon, you get Tyre and Sidon, famous maritime civilizations, who actually sent out what we call the Phoenicians, and they colonised North Africa. Remember, so Hannibal with his elephants almost conquered Rome. We almost lived under the whole sort of Phoenician Empire rather than the Roman Empire. That's how close that struggle was. So 100, 200 k's further north, different ball game. Okay? And we are talking like the friends that I chat with in Israel and Palestine and so on, they can't believe how far we drive. Okay? Yeah. The whole of the country we're talking about today, I used to explain it when I was teaching as being in the Gold Coast hinterland. It would certainly fit within the northern rivers, not even the north coast, the northern rivers, except they don't have a single river. And I know you think the Clarence is better than the Richmond, but they don't have a river that counts against any of our creeks even. Okay, perhaps say Alumni Creek is about what the Jordan River is. Okay, so this will have an impact on communication in that the people living in Palestine are not going to be seafarers, but they're going to be constantly saying welcome to invading armies because that was the way to get to the other place. From their point of view, the sea was a place where you could fish, but it was a scary place and there were monsters out there. Sea monsters, dragons, all kinds of scary things, okay? And you get storms and you drown. And so the Israelites, the people that live in Canaan, whether they're Israelites, Palestinians, whatever, they're landlubbers. Okay? They're not seafarers. Not a lot of rainfall. Think of it as being very much like Perth, southwest corner, south of Western Australia, a little bit like Adelaide. Technically it's what's called Mediterranean climate. It's the Mediterranean. When I was at high school, it was called West Coast Subtropical, whereas we have East Coast Subtropical here. West Coast, so it's much the same weather as ours, only upside down. They get wet winters, and in summer, everything dies for lack of rain. Well, that's Palestine. Okay? They get about the same sort of rain you get in Adelaide or Perth. It does have some fertile land. It's not the land that flows with milk and honey. That was a very early real estate advertisement which Moses picked up in Egypt, and it wasn't really a good idea. Okay? It didn't work out that way. But it does have some fertile land. And there are one or two strategic locations because of the highways that traders and armies would use. Now, it's one thing to try and stop a caravan of merchants and say, before you pass our village, you have to part with some shekels, but you don't say that to Nebuchadnezzar. It's like, welcome, Your Majesty, what would you like for dinner? Okay, so you can see the problem of having a strategic location is an asset in good times and it's a problem in bad times because everybody wants to control that strategic bump. So, let's have a look at it. So it's part of the fertile, what we used to call the Fertile Crescent, stretching basically from Egypt up the coast of Palestine, up through Syria, top of Syria, and then back through the what today is Iraq and western Iran. And that Fertile Crescent, if you're going to move, whether it's for trade activity or whether it's because of imperial expansion, you're going to go where the grass is green because you're driving horses and camels and donkeys. Okay, they weren't using, there was lots of oil under the ground, but they didn't have internal combustion engines. They had no idea that stuff was any use to anybody. Okay, whether it is a whole other argument, I realise, but let's just leave that for now. So you're going to travel through the fertile areas so that your herds can graze. and you're going to be able to get supplies either by paying for it or by demanding it from the locals. Okay. On either side of that, you get inhospitable territories, including the Arabian Desert, and the inhospitable territories for the people living on the land include the oceans, because them's are scary things. Okay. So that is going to impact, as I started out by saying, on the possibilities that are available for human activity in that space, given the technologies available at the time. Okay. So there are going to be interaction, and this point is saying that if you do have farmers that have carved out a life over several thousand years, growing crops, running herds, and so on, and then you get the nomadic people that come through, and then you get the military people coming through, there are going to be structural interactions between those. So there's an ancient tension between the farmer and the pastoralists. People running goats and sheep want to be able to move to where the grass is green, but you don't want them coming to your valley when your crops are just beginning to look nice and green. But you do want them coming after harvest so the sheep can go poo, poo, poo all over your paddock and give you fertiliser for next year. So you've got to work out. So the ancient story of Cain and Abel is a story about the hatred between the farmer and the shepherd. Okay? Sometimes you work it out, other times you don't. You mostly work it out when there's an even bigger bully who says, you two be nice or I will kill both of you. Sure, we'll work something out. Okay, so this is the bit we're looking at. Down the bottom here is what's left of the Dead Sea. I'll talk about that in a minute. And right up the top is what's called the Sea of Galilee, or the Lake Tiberias.
So roughly that distance there is 200 km.
Okay. Nazareth is here. Jerusalem is here. As the crow flies, that's 100 k's. So from there, so from the lake to the top of the Dead Sea would probably be less than 100 k's, but not much less. Highway 90 runs down the western side of the river, and I could get from the city of Tiberias to Jerusalem in 2 hours if I strapped it a bit, because it's not a super highway, and it's used by a lot of trucks. It's like the old Pacific Highway. If I came down Highway 6, which is a 6-lane superhighway, same distance is much quicker because the minimum speed is 120. That's the one with the red circle. That's what it means, doesn't it? The circle means nothing below this speed. That's what it means in Israel. If you're doing 125, they're behind you flashing their lights and blowing the horn to push you out of the way, and you drive this far off the car in front. Okay? At 130, 140 km. It's wonderful if you like that sort of thing. Anyway, so what are the peculiarities? Okay, we've mentioned some of this already. It's a land bridge between Asia, Africa, and Europe. If you want to walk there, you had to come through Palestine. From wherever you started, you had to go through Palestine if you're coming to or from Egypt, basically. There are no natural harbours, as you can see. The only thing approaching a natural harbour is this bump here, and today that's Haifa. But Haifa was only developed as a port in like the 18th century, 200 years ago, because the technology allowed different kind of shipping and so on. Coast of Palestine, it's like the 7 Mile beach, but it goes a couple of hundred kilometres. No major rivers. We'll have a look at some photos of the Jordan River. But the Jordan River and the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee are the northern remnant of the Great Rift Valley from East Africa. So there's a massive geological fault line that runs up from East Africa, up through the Red Sea, and then up through the Gulf of Aqaba, and then right up to the mountains of Lebanon here. And thousands of years ago, that was all ocean. And it has shrunk back to what we now call the Gulf of Aqaba and the Red Sea. So this was deeper and wilder and an amazing place in the past. But slowly, firstly it's lost its access to the ocean. So this, as you know, has become a salt sea. What you probably don't know is it's about 38% mineral salts. So it's interesting, slimy. Too much washing up liquid in Singular, that kind of slide. Yeah, exactly. However, despite the fact that it's tiny and it has no natural harbours and no major rivers, it has several distinct local areas. And we're going to go on a photo tour of these 10 areas, basically. Okay? So the first one is the coastal strip. And here on this map, the colour, green indicates, all the colours indicate elevation. So green is relatively low, brown is higher, and white, up in the mountains of Lebanon, think snow, but it's basically saying it's a much higher elevation. It doesn't mean it's green, it just means it's flat, low. Okay, so the coastal strip is obviously where most people wanted to live in the past. That's where most Israelis live. That's interesting, that's where the Philistines used to live. The Israelites lived out here in the hill country, which was no good for farming, and the Philistines didn't want it. Guess what's happened? This is the West Bank, which sort of the Palestinians are being allowed to have, kind of. And the country of the Philistines, which is much better for farming and agriculture, has been taken by the Israelis. Okay? So that's the coastal strip. The area 2 is called the Shephelah. It's the rolling hills. It's like, again, in Brisbane terms, it's like driving out through Marburg on your way to Toowoomba. You go over the Marburg Range. It's those rolling hills. As you move from the flat coastal strip, begin to move up to the highlands, and so you go through some rolling hills. And this was the border country between Philistines and the Canaanites, between the Philistines and the Israelites. And it's border country because chariots are good on flat land. They're hopeless in the mountains. And on the hills, you might get away with scaring the natives if you turn up with a couple of hundred chariots. But if the natives are clever, they can run you into places where the chariots don't work, and then you're dead meat. Okay? So the Shephelah. 3 is the Judean hill country, and we're going to see there's actually a mountain ridge coming up here. It's a bit of a flat spot, and then it continues up in number 9 in the Galilee, and there's a matching ridge on the other side running up the east. That's because, remember, these are the same hills, but they've been cracked in half by the Great Rift Valley millions of years ago from North Africa. Okay, the Judean desert is a tiny little rain shadow. It's only about 7 square kilometres, and it's between the hills of Judea and the Dead Sea. So the rain is coming from the west. As it starts to go up over the hills, it's going to drop rain on the Shephelah and even occasionally on the hill country. And then it's going to blow, because it's got so high, it's going to blow across and it's going to drop rain here, but there's going to be a rain shadow there. And that's called the Judean wilderness, or the desert of Judea. To the south is the Negev, and that's just a Hebrew word meaning the south, but it's a desert. Okay. These days these days it's Israel, because the Israeli map comes down like this. Okay, but then in Egypt on the other side. Central Hill Country, number 6. It's the northern extension of this, but it actually gets more rain. It's a little bit more like sort of Lebanon, and that's always been a much wealthier, richer agricultural area. And down here, this is semi-desert, this is semi-nice. So that's sort of the difference. Okay? So whoever is up here is always richer and more powerful than the people living down here. In biblical terms, this is the kingdom of Israel, this is the kingdom of Judah. We get the Bible from these people, but these people were the ones who had more power and more money. So then we get the Jordan Rift Valley. I've talked a little bit about it. We'll come back to the Dead Sea in a moment. The plain of Jezreel is this area running basically from the southern tip of the Sea of Galilee. That line probably needs to come up just here a little bit. It's a flat, fertile plain. It is the best farming land in Israel. Best farming land in Palestine. Also the scene of famous chariot battles in the past, because it was flat. Flat and marshy. So if you're the local, what do? You try and push the army with the chariots towards the marsh, because then they're going to be bogged and then they're just sitting targets. Okay. 9 is Galilee, and you see the Sea of Galilee is included in that district. And you notice it's also a continuation of the same hills. And the further north you go in Galilee, the higher the hills become, because in effect you're joining into the hills of those mountains of Lebanon. Down the eastern side of the river is what's called, in biblical historical terms, Transjordan, which of course just means the other side of Jordan. But who's going to use that? Not the people living on the eastern side. It's obviously a label given to that side of the river by the people living on this side of the river, particularly in the time of the British Mandate. It was not a division that ever existed prior to the British Mandate, or possibly in the Ottoman period. They certainly had Palestine 1 and Palestine 2 for the south and the north. They may have had a Palestine 3. I'm just not sure of that detail. Okay, so looking at it like that, you get a bit of a sense of the geography. These hills are quite significant. They're not super high mountains, but they're relatively steep. And conversely, when you're looking at the Sea of Galilee, at the moment, you're about 420 metres below sea level at the surface of the Dead Sea. Okay. So between Jerusalem, which might be, say, 1,200 metres above sea level, the Dead Sea is 420. A couple of years ago, it was 417. You get the point. It's going down by about a metre a year. Okay. And shrinking, which is why it's no longer one continuous lake. That's just an artificial channel that's been dug to let some of the water come down to the bottom half. And the Sea of Galilee, they try to keep it, they try to manage the water levels, the water consumption, the rainflow, so that it stays about 210 metres below sea level. So even the Sea of Galilee, because it's in the Rift Valley, is below sea level. What we call sea level, because that's Mediterranean and the rest of the place. That also means if you want, so in the from Crusader times, in the early Mamluk period, don't worry about the names, and then through to the Ottoman period, this was a very productive area for growing sugarcane. And it was a state monopoly, and they sold the sugarcane to Europe. In fact, our word sugar is from the Arabic sukra. Okay, it's their word, like alcohol and various others. When the Western powers discovered they could grow sugarcane in the West Indies, instead of buying it off the Ottomans, the bottom dropped out of the sugar industry in the Galilee. And so there's no sugar growing there. Now they grow bananas and oranges and other things like that. Okay. Another way of demonstrating that is just to kind of do this sketch, which I did many, many years ago, but this sketch has survived various different computers. So the sea plain is area 1, the rolling hills of the Shephelah, the high country of around Jerusalem, the Judean desert just on the edge, dropping down to the Dead Sea and going up to the other half of the same mountains on the east side of the Jordan River, which of course, as you can see, it's the same mountain, it's just it's been cut through the middle by the Great Rift. And part of that is because the African plate is moving north and the Asian plate is moving northwest, sliding underneath Europe, and this is where they do it. So there's a major earthquake in the Jordan Valley every 100 years, and it destroys civilization. In the past, with their technology, those 1 in 100 year, we know the language, 1 in 100 year, not floods, never going to get a halfway decent flood out of that river, but 1 in 100 year earthquakes, because gradually the tension with the plates moving, sooner or later it has to be released, you get a major earthquake. Okay? And so that's what destroys cities built of stone. We all come falling down. Okay? The last earthquake, people when they came to courses in Jerusalem College always used to ask, so when was the last 100-year earthquake? About 110 years ago. So any day. And there was indeed a major earthquake in the Jordan Valley in the first decade or so of the 20th century. So it's coming up.
The split there in the Rift Valley is like what's happening in Hawaii.
Yeah, it's like the Sandiamo Fault. And
it's just opened up and it's going to go through suburbs.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Okay, I remember when we moved to California, we was having dinner at someone's house, and we said, "So where exactly is the Sandiamo Fault?" And they said, "Actually, right underneath your table where you're sitting." Because everything where we were living is going to become ocean one day soon. It's just a question of the definition of soon.
Yeah.
And geological time is different from human time. Because, we work in chunks of 50, 70, 80 years, whatever, whereas this is a different kind of cycle. So you can see, so the rain, when it comes, is going to fall here, and a little bit here, nothing here. But the clouds will continue across. These mountains are a little bit higher, and so they will capture a bit of rain. And so the eastern shore of Jordan and the hills just above are green, and as soon as you drive 10 minutes further east, it's desert. So it looks like that. You play with your mapping technology. Okay. And that's just another way of trying to show it. Okay. And that's the coastal strip. Not much to write home to mum about in terms of natural harbours. Okay. So let's have a look and we're going to do a bit of a guided tour, just a quick photo tour of these areas and interrupt with questions, observations as we go along. So firstly, the coastal strip. This is going to look just like pretty normal, valuable farming land, but also, of course, good places to build cities. So most of the more heavily populated Israeli cities, particularly Tel Aviv, but also the major conurbation stretching from Tel Aviv up towards Caesarea, it's built on good farming land, which we do as well, of course. Okay. So this will just give you a hint of some of the places. The ocean in the background, sand dunes, and then some crops here in the front. This is probably the place that Goliath came from, Goliath of Gath. This is what's called a tell, and as you can see, the land is pretty flat. So when you find a bump like that in an otherwise flat area, you know it's an ancient city. Okay, so you excavate it if you can get the money and the time and people to do it. So called tells. Because when an ancient city goes through a urban renewal project and it's conquered and burnt down by your enemies, and you come back and you decide to rebuild everything, you don't have sort of caterpillar tractors sending their equipment around. You have people, so you smooth it out. You might rescue some of those. There's some nicely cut bits of stone. You might put them aside because they'll be useful. But it's basically a giant recycling job. There's no Bunnings and there's no Caterpillar tractors. So over time, as these places get hit every 50 to 150 years, they get destroyed, and the mayor says, "Come on guys, let's rebuild. This is a really good place to live, remember? Because it's got water, it's got land, and it's got some strategic significance. It's a good place to have a city." So they rebuild. So over the centuries, the city gets higher and higher and higher, which in a way is an advantage because that makes it more easier to protect. Because they didn't have missiles, they didn't have aeroplanes. Okay? So height is a defensive advantage. So you'll see a number of tells probably in the next minute or two. This is sort of modern sort of Israeli citrus growing, presumably south of Tel Aviv. You can see it. It's highly commercialised, mechanised farming. They've always grown oranges at Jaffa, okay, but they've never grown them like this. That's technology. Okay, then the Shephelah, the rolling hills. So you're starting to move up towards Jerusalem, and you can see the hills the land is beginning to get just a little bit hilly. Not a problem, but it's starting to get a bit bumpy. Still under pretty intensive cultivation, as you can see. This is some of the more sort of the older kind of transportation routes. quarry that they're taking stuff out for roadworks and so on. And again, in this case, they've moved to vines, so they're no longer growing citrus. They've moved into vineyards, and it's going to be highly mechanised and highly irrigated. Once you get into the hill country, now it's getting, you can see the difference. Not only are the hills bigger, but they're basically bare limestone with a few trees growing here and there. So what are you going to, if you're a farmer and this is the bit of land you're being able to get control of, what are you going to do with it? Okay, well, you'll plant olives. That's a long-term investment. It takes years before they produce, but they will last hundreds of years, so they're good for your great-grandchildren. That's important. Family is a key social value here because you only get the benefit if the family stays put. Okay. And you could maybe run a few goats, but you're not going to grow veggies. You're not going to grow much else. You're not going to grow grains. So this is southwest of Jerusalem, back towards the coast.
There's no creek running down through that, or is the Jordan River run through?
No, we're sort of southwest of Jerusalem. So here you've got olive trees. Yeah. Notice when you get to the bottom of a valley, it is greener, like the little green strip on the edge of the bitumen on the highway, you know, runoff and so on because of the way we do the curve, the macadamization of our road. So again, if you're, and of course this lends itself to, you can have your olives and you can run a few goats because the goats can eat the grass and enjoy the shade, and the grass will last longer. Then the bottom of the valleys, there'll be enough moisture to keep things going. So you're going to do little tiny micro dams. And where they do grow crops in this area, it's in a field no bigger than like from me to the kitchen door. I have a little flat spot that they've created, and they'll grow a bit of stuff there for the house. It's not going to be hundreds of acres of agriculture. As you can see, yeah, rocky Judean hills and lots of terracing where the farmers over the years, because when it does rain, these will come green for a little period of time, and then you can grow crops with fairly short harvest times. Again, there's Nahal is a Hebrew word for river, which really means creek for us. Okay? So there is a what's called the Sorek River, running through this valley at the bottom. And lots of pine. You can also grow pine trees really well, but unless you're into pine furniture or something, because they weren't in the ancient world, pine trees are really just for decoration. And this is part of Israel's propaganda about turning the desert green. This is not desert, it's just rocky hill country. But they've planted thousands and thousands and thousands, if not millions of trees after 1948, usually on the site of bulldozed Palestinian villages, so that they can never come home. Because these are all state forests. I'm sorry, it's a national park. You can't have a house there anymore. Okay. So you get a sense of, again, the same river, the Nahal Sorek, and this photo is obviously taken around about now, maybe February or March. This photo would have been taken. Okay, this is the wilderness of Ziph, and which you hear about, and as you can see, it's wilderness. And if you look in the distance, that's the wilderness of Judea, or even, that'll be the wilderness of Judea, or possibly the other side of the Jordan River. And you can run goats, you can run sheep. It's actually mostly goats rather than sheep. The goats will sort of forage. You're not going to run cattle here. These are not dairy farmers, and they're not going to become macadamia farms in 10 years. It's just not going to happen. It's not the northern rivers. Okay, Judean, if you thought that was desert, now we'll get to the desert. Okay, and of course the three wise men are having a cup of tea, and just off camera with their billies. But this is the desert. This is actually in the Judean desert, but you get a sense, or near the Judean desert. It's not sand dunes. It's not the Sahara. It's sort of mountain desert. It's desert because there's no water. Again, there's obviously a little tiny bit of a low spot running through there called a wadi in Arabic. or Nahal in Hebrew. And when it rains, that's going to be flooding through there. You can see the way it's washed out. When it rains up here in the hills, it just floods. An hour later, it'll be flooding down here. 2 hours later, the water's gone into the Jordan River. Okay. And a little bit will survive because there's a little low spot there, and some of it's gone into groundwater. Okay, this is Herodian. We all know about King Herod, and he decided that he was going to have the best grade that anybody in the world had ever had. So he got advanced copies of the plans for Parliament House in Canberra. That's actually a cylindrical palace. And around it, he's had his engineers pile up the dirt, so it would just look like another hill, except there's no other hill that size in the neighbourhood. But it had to be that high because he wanted to be able to see the temple in Jerusalem from his palace at Herodian. Okay, and it's only like 10 k's outside Jerusalem. Jerusalem literally sits on the edge of the desert. You look this way into the city and it's all green because of irrigation and Judean hill country. You turn around this way and you're looking at the wilderness of Judea. It's desert. So right on the edge of the desert. And you can just see this, if you know where to look, you can just pick this up when you're standing in certain lookouts in Jerusalem. Okay, Tekoa, Amos in the Old Testament was a goat herder and a trimmer of sycamore trees. So he'd work out seasonal kind of work. He was from the village of Tekoa. And Tekoa is next door to where Herod built his palace. So this is where you can run sheep. But that's the hill. That's one. Then you've gone to the desert, and really that's probably the matching country on the other side of the Jordan River. I think you can run sheep. And this is in the middle of winter, but it's not yet rain. This will become completely green for about a month, and then it's gone. So Passover, spring festivals, when you had to move your flocks, had to wait till the new lambs were old enough to walk long distances. You had to move your flock from where you could get good grass in winter because of the rain, so the easy stuff. That's when the sheep want to have their lambs and so on. And then when the lambs are old enough, you transfer them over to the summer pastures where it's going to be harder to find good grass. And of course you sacrifice a lamb to keep God off your back before you. It's like taking one of your kids, sacrifice them, get in the car, and the rest of the family drive on to the grandma's house. That kind of idea. So this is winter, but it's not yet had the benefit of the rain. These are some of the caves, again near Tekoa. This kind of hilly country lends itself to caves, which can be natural caves, but also, see, this is actually made. This is constructed. They've taken a natural cave and they've put a little room on the front. And so in the Byzantine period, 4th, 5th century, there were thousands of Christian monks living in the desert, in this little 7 square mile desert. Okay. And there are still some of their monasteries left. This is the Nahal Kidron, or what we would call Kidron Brook, Kidron Stream. That's near Masabar. Masabar is one of the oldest and most important of the desert monasteries. And you can see how over the centuries, probably over the millennia, this little creek down here, has caused all this damage. Or created this beautiful landscape, depending on what you're looking for in a piece of landscape. Okay? So in the flood season, it's going to gouge out. And then in the dry season, it's just this little creek down the bottom. All right, so one of my favourite places, see this little monastery hanging on, just sort of clinging to the side of the cliffs. It's St George's Monastery at Wadi Kelt. Wadi Kelt, this winding road down the bottom here, that's the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Ever heard of that story, that road? Sorry? Yeah, the road to Jericho. There's a famous story Jesus tells about the Samaritan. So this guy, in that story, this is the highway, the commas. Down the bottom down there is the highway from Jerusalem to Jericho. See this pasture down here? There's a road. But you notice how it's a winding road. You never know what's around the next corner. He's going to ambush you and beat you up. Okay? But it was the only way to get through the hills, from Jerusalem up on top of the hill, down to Jericho, which is just north of the Dead Sea. It's several hundred metres south, below you.
And is that monastery still there?
Yeah, there's about half a dozen Greek monks living there. If you look carefully, I've got so many photos of this place, but so that's the monastery boundary, marking out the sacred boundary. These little posts are here. That bridge goes back to underneath. The bottom part of the bridge goes back to Roman times. But on the roof, they've got satellite dishes and solar panels and stuff. Yeah, you want some modern comforts. So
How do they survive? As far as food and...
Well, they have little dams, like farming. These days they bring food in. They've got tractors and trucks and stuff.
Sort of still lines.
Yeah. We call it generically line. It's got a more technical name like stalactite or something. It's a particular kind of rock. Now, until you've mastered how to create cisterns and capture the rainwater, it's really hard to live out here. All right, so get the drift. And this is further, a little bit south from Jericho. Here's the top edge of the Dead Sea. And you see how even in the last few decades it's shrunk back. All of this used to be ocean, sea. And these used to be seafront resorts. And now the water is a long way away. And they're beginning to get sort of sinkholes forming here because the rock structure that's underneath in the Rift Valley has been underwater for millions of years. And as the water shrinks, those rock structures are collapsing and sinkholes as big as this room are just appearing, taking out houses, taking out half the road, whatever.
Is that also partly because a lot more water is taken out of the river?
We'll come to the river and it's a mixture of things. Yeah, there's not so much there's less rain, but there's less water making it into the Dead Sea.
Irrigation.
Exactly. So it's human intervention. The so-called Dead Sea Scrolls were found, guess what, in these hills, in these caves here, on the edge of the Dead Sea. It's famous Dead Sea. Cave 4. Inside Cave 4. And so on. But it does, you do get rain once or twice a year, and the place comes to life when the desert blooms. And that, of course, is a biblical symbol for hope, for renewal. When the desert, even the desert can bloom, God sends the rain.
So there's much use made of groundwater.
Yes. Under the central hill country, which is all Palestinian land, there are massive artesian water reserves, which Israel is pumping out for its own use illegally. And then it sells a portion of that water, a tiny percentage of the water, it sells back to the Palestinian Authority at 4 or 5 times the price that it charges Jewish settlers who are running illegal settlements on Palestinian land in the West Bank. Yeah. And in the process, they're sucking out the most precious resource in the Middle East from the Palestinians, which is water. And the Palestinians are not allowed to do their own wells or bores, even though it's their land. So here you get, we're at Qumran. This is the receding shoreline. This road was, when I first drove down that road in about 1990, the water was right next to the road. Okay? And that's Jordan on the other side. So it's very close, very close. Not as close as South Grafton, but close. Okay. Nahal David, or David's Spring, David's River, that's an area that features in the Old Testament. David is running away from King Saul. He does what everybody does. He goes out into the wilderness, runs away from the cities, tries to get out into the wild lands, and according to the biblical story, he found the spring in what's now called the Wadi David. Obviously it wasn't called Wadi David at the time, or Dawood at the time. And so that's now part of Israel, and because the way the map works, and it's a very popular hiking area at some times of the year. Again, if you get heavy rain up here, this is just going to be a thunder stream a couple of hours later. And that's the classic photo that everybody does. When they go to the Dead Sea, you float on the water because I've lost the word, but the water is so thick with mineral salts. Not even dense. There's another. I was going to say there's another word beside density. Maybe it is density, but there's a word that describes it in technical terms. And because it is so, whatever that word is, literally humans just float on top of it. It's also so salty. You don't want it in your wound. You don't want to have a shaving scratch or an open sore. You don't want to open your eyes. And actually, it's when ladies find out whether the gold jewellery that their husband gave them is really gold if they wear it into the sea.
Is that the water looks clear? Is it?
It's not clear. No, it's murky.
So that's sort of frothy stuff on top there, not.
Oh, it's just a bit of breeze. So it's just a little bit of.
It's not looking down into the water and seeing those white colours below.
No, it's quite murky. It really is just slimy. And this is the salt that's left on the shoreline. So guess what they do down here and have always done down here? They mine salt.
Yeah.
And the word salary comes across from salt because the Romans used to pay their soldiers in salt because it preserved their food. It was a commodity you could swap and barter.
Now they get women's cosmetics.
Oh yeah, and the mud which has all these sort of minerals, 38% water and water, sort of Dead Sea beauty products from the Israeli side, and there's a similar Jordanian operation on the other side of the river, other side of the lake, whatever. It's very high end, but again, it's there are issues to do. If you've heard of boycott, divestment, and sanction stuff, there are people who think we should boycott the Israeli, I guess, Havla, whatever, products because they're actually set up on stolen Palestinian land. But yeah, they're very expensive health products, especially mud from the Dead Sea. Sorry,
Open markets.
yeah, top shelf stuff. Okay, it's just provided naturally. Then we go further south. While we're in the desert, let's go further down to the Negev, and this again is really dry. You're never going to grow anything here very much. See, sort of modern, obviously in the past, these sort of modern bitumen roads didn't exist, so traversing that terrain was pretty challenging.
Is that one area where the dead man collapses, the water's washed out? See that little curl with it? Yeah.
No, that's just the road climbing up, doing a hairpin bend and climbing up to the hill.
Goes down the side.
No, we're a fair way away from the water body, Steve. We're south of the Dead Sea and further to the west. Again, we see there has been water here in the past. We can see that,
Yeah.
but it has gouged out the landscape. Fantastic areas now for the Israeli tourism industry, which didn't exist 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 3,000 years ago. Okay, this is beautiful country. So there are B&Bs and lodges and so on, where you can go and explore this country with all the comforts of home. Not actually, walking through the desert. Okay. The wilderness of Paran is one of the places that's mentioned in the Exodus story, the children of Israel. Goes through the wilderness of Paran. Now, in the biblical story, there are 600,000 Hebrews of military age, plus their wives and children, plus a large group of hangers-on. So around 2 million people. That's clearly exaggerated. You're not going to keep 2 million people
In that area.
travelling safely. And the best part is they never dropped a single piece of litter. Because if they'd even just dropped a spade or a bit of broken pottery, we would find it. The archaeologists would find it. So we know they weren't there. But you can't have 2 million people. A, you can't have 2 million people passing through this area. B, even a much smaller group of people moving through this area would leave stuff behind, which the archaeologists would find. People would carve things on the rocks. Pottery and other things would be abandoned, broken wheels would be left behind, etc. So there were ultimate greenies not very green area. Timna is down near the tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, and it's where they used to mine copper. So whoever controlled that area was the supplier of copper to the Egyptians and to various other political powers. All right, now we're heading north from Jerusalem into the hill country, the central hill country, which is also called Samaria. In the Old Testament and even the New Testament, this is the northern kingdom of Israel, came to be called Samaria. It's still hilly, as you can see. This was probably Shiloh, which is at the southern edge of that area. It's still quite hilly, but it is much greener. Look, it's much. And these of course, are all. In fact, these are sort of Palestinian homes. Because it's looking down from Mount Gerizim, this will be Nablus, the city of Nablus, which is where Jacob's well is located. Nablus is the new city that was built in the 40s or 50s, the first century, and in Greek that's Neapolis, and it's come down in Arabic as Nablus. Neapolis, Nablus. Arabic doesn't have a p, so Neapolis becomes Nablus. It's a major Palestinian city of several 100,000 people, and there's about a couple of thousand Christians there, and there are 2 Anglican churches there as well. So you can see it's much greener than further. Is in the right time of the year as well. But still, notice all the sort of terraces. They're using, all over here, they're using every bit, they're creating little flat spots, but you can't use, well, they didn't have mechanised farming. You can't do mechanised farming on these little plots. So Palestinians grow just enough stuff to go and sell in the market, whereas Israelis would carve out several hundred acres and use sort of mechanised farming techniques. Very beautiful. Now the river. Right up the northern tip. So up here is the southern edge of the Sea of Galilee. These are basically fish farms using water from the Sea of Galilee, which gets to the point about what's going on in terms of water consumption. Modern Israelis, whether they're Jewish or Palestinian, modern Israelis want to have a Western lifestyle. So they want to have swimming pools, and they want to have grass, and they want to have decorative plants rather than just agricultural plants and so on. So the lifestyle pressure, particularly from the sort of Jewish Israeli community as such, it's so much fresh water, and of course the Sea of Galilee is like God's dam. You know, it's like, oh, we didn't even have to build a wall here. Here's this huge freshwater lake. So Israel has been pumping so much water out of that the water level has at times threatened to drop below 200 metres below sea level. So as the numbers get bigger, you're actually going deeper. Right? When it's healthy, it's more like 250 metres below sea level. It'll be a natural sort of level. They try to keep it between 210 and 220 metres below sea level. So anything above that, they pump out. Now, prior to 1948, where did that water go? Down the river. Kept the Jordan Valley healthy. Ecological flows, I think, might be the description we hear in the Murray-Darling context. And it went into the Dead Sea, which was much deeper. I don't think I've got a photo of it here, but when we drive down to the Dead Sea, there's a place about a couple of kilometres south of Qumran where there's a bit of a cliff and the road sort of comes right out around just into the cliff, and you can look down to the Dead Sea, or you can look over there to the Dead Sea. But 110 years ago, there was a survey done by the Palestine Exploration Fund. These were British Army engineers secretly mapping Palestine, which was Ottoman territory, under the guise of doing biblical archaeology. So they were providing detailed topographical maps to the British Army for when they invaded Palestine. World War I came along and they got it anyway, but that was the plan. So these guys painted a line on the rock as to where the water level was in 1917 or 1914 or whatever. Now when we drive down the road, that painted line is above the roof of the bus. So in 100 years, the lake has gone from there to over there. So much water has been taken out, and a big part of the peace treaty between Jordan and Israel was actually agreeing on a percentage of the fresh water from the Sea of Galilee and the Jordan River, which is here, by the way.
That's it there.
That's it. That's the river at its source. Well, close to its source. I mean, there's the lake. Obviously, it curls around here a little bit. And this is Jordan. And some of this farming activity is Jordan. In fact, at this point, when you're on the road looking down at this, the border fence is basically just below you. So actually, all of that is possibly Jordanian agricultural activity, because when the river curls to the west, then Jordan expands to the west. When the river bends to the east, then Israel goes out to the east. And because the river changes its course every time there's a major flood, there's a special international committee that adjusts the Israel-Jordanian border to say where it is now, because the river just keeps moving a few metres left and right. So this is where it starts, in the Sea of Galilee. That's what it looks like at that point. Notice the gum trees, because the British imported eucalypts to soak up the swamps. And like California, they went feral. And there are gum trees all over northern Israel. So you kind of feel, go down by the Sea of Galilee and it's surrounded by gum trees. Jesus had a home among the gum trees. No, he didn't. Because there weren't any gum trees in Palestine before the British mandate. That's nice, but it's not exactly big. It's not big river country. Right? There it is. That's kind of the bit we were looking at before. Above. One side is this side will be Jordan, this side will be Israel. So you can also see why it's a security problem. If that's an enemy country on the other side of the river,
Pretty close, aren't they?
they're not very far away, and especially with modern technology. Okay? You don't need missiles. I mean, they're just across the river, across the creek. And you can see how all this muddy floodplain, this channel is going to be gouged differently the next time there's a major flood event. And so the border will shift. Okay. So this is just where it's beginning south of the Sea of Galilee. It also comes into the north of the Sea of Galilee. This is the junction. So there's the Jordan River. And this one, little one here is what's called the Yarmouk River. Okay, they use river differently than we do. Okay? And this is Jordan. Okay. Oops, Plain of Jezreel. So Plain of Jezreel up in the north is the best bit of real estate for farming and so on in the area. This photo is taken from Mount Carmel, looking back towards the Sea of Galilee, which is sort of out of line, out of view. So Nazareth is this little white blob up here. For some reason, they didn't put the name on it. This bump here is Mount Tabor. It's the only significant hill in the area. This is a modern sort of Israeli township called Yokneam. And Mount Gilboa, the northern tip of the central hill country of Israel, is where King Saul committed suicide. More importantly, it has a beautiful purple lily, Mount Gilboa, or the Gilboa lily, which only flowers for about 2 weeks in late February, early March. So thousands of people go there and trample over the mountain, and they've now had to put special paths through so the tourists don't kill the flowers that they come to see. Yeah, they're only there for about 2 to 3 weeks, and then they're gone. Beautiful little purple lily. Okay, this is again. So across here you've got, that would be Mount Tabor, I think. This is Afuli. Again, Israeli people call it Afula. The Arabs call it Afuli. And one of the things that's happening, even with, and many of these are just traditional Arabic names, but Israel is imposing a standardized spelling and pronunciation, which is Hebrew spelling and pronunciation, on the Palestinians. So by choice, I always refer to it as Afuli. I never call it Afula. I always refer to it as Afuli. Again, you can see it's a modern Israeli development. It's built in a defensive circle. So if they're ever attacked by the wild hordes of Arab barbarians, they've got a natural sort of circle. They've already circled the wagons.
So how old would that town be? Like is
Less
it
than 100 years.
less than 100?
Yeah.
Now when they drive cars around the streets, because it doesn't
Yeah, yeah.
big
Oh,
enough.
yeah, no, it's big enough. It's quite a big place. This is a fair way. Yeah. And this is Afuli Ilik, which is Upper Afuli, and that's Nazareth up there. That's a Palestinian place. That's a Palestinian place. This will be. This one's probably called Dabaria. So Deborah's village from the Book of Judges. Just around the corner here is the village of Nain, where the widow's son was brought to life. And so this is probably the village of Iksal, and up here is Nazareth. Now, Palestinian towns are not built in defensive configurations. Okay? Modern Israeli towns are built for defensive military purposes. That's what happens when you go and steal somebody else's country.
Yeah.
Unless you bring so many white fellas in that you overwhelm the indigenous people. That's what we did. And so sure, we can give them the vote, 2%, or they get a change. Okay? Israelis and Palestinians are 50-50 now. In 1948, they were 80% Palestinian, 20% Jewish, and the Jewish got the lands. Okay, now despite the 6-7 million refugees that are not allowed to come home, there are now even numbers of Palestinians and Jews between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. There's the problem for Israel. It cannot give them the vote, or else the Knesset would not be a Jewish parliament. Okay? So they're in a hard space. Imagine how our farmers would feel if the indigenous people were 50% of the population, but we owned all the land. Pressure on the government to not make any concessions around land rights. Okay? So it's a very difficult thing. So the landscape is still there, but you can tell, like as you're driving down the road, you can pick an Arab house from a Jewish house. No problem at all. Okay? For a start, Jewish houses in the west side, Palestinian houses in the West Bank will have hot water systems on the roof, and they don't get town water supply. Whereas any Israeli settlement houses have pitch roofs with red tiles, they get town water supply, they don't have hot water systems on the roof. Just driving down the road, you can pick, which house to shoot at or which house to burn down when the trouble comes. But two communities sharing the same, all of this land is owned by Jewish people, it's owned by the Jewish National Fund. Okay? And the only reason the Arabs have got this little bit of land over here is because the Brits gave it to them in the 1920s. Okay? And so they're squashed in on the little bit of land that they're allowed to have, and all of this is land exclusively for the benefit of Jewish people. Now, there is a word for that, but that's not our point today. Okay, so again, this is just looking down more closely onto Yokneam, which we don't need to worry about. Looking from Megiddo, again, there's Mount Tabor. See, it's a very distinctive shape. That's the place most people connect with the Transfiguration story. Why? Because it's the only hill in the Galilee like that. So it gets the Guernsey. Okay? It doesn't mean it happened there, but it's a good place to imagine it happening because this hill by itself. It must be the one. Must be the one. Okay. Again, you see there's no farming land like this anywhere else in the country. Under the 1948 petition agreement, this is Arab land. But the Arabs lost it in 1948 and the Jews took it. Okay, same thing. These are Israeli houses. Notice, I can see straight away. These are Israeli houses, Jewish houses. Sorry. It is, because it's, Shunem is where, it takes us back to the stories about Elijah and Elisha. The reason I hesitated is that looks like a mosque. And again, if there's a mosque in the village, it's not a Jewish village. Okay. So, I'm not 100% sure of that one. So, Galilee itself, the further north you go, it's very hilly. It's like around Jerusalem, you're beginning to get up into the Lebanese mountains. And this is the border. Highly militarized border.
So is that a road?
No, it's the border.
Just
And they keep it completely bare on both sides and they sweep it. So if anybody comes over during the night, the patrols can see they've come across. It's just like dirt. It's packed road base. Here's the road, bitumen. This is security fence. Barbed wire on the outside, electric fence in the middle, barbed wire on the other side, and the UN observation force trying to make sure they stop killing each other. Okay. So this is up, Mount Hermon is up in the north, so this is way up in the north, and you can see very high hills here. These are the mountains of Lebanon. And this, of course, is cattle country. So when it talks about in the Psalms about fat bulls of Bashan, this is Bashan. So up in the north, the pagans imagined their gods as oxen, as cattle. Okay? So you get, because that was the main agricultural activity was to run cattle, which you couldn't do further south. Okay, slopes of Mountain Road. Again, it's pretty dry, pretty rugged. You're only going to be able to do much farming here if you're using very modern technology. This is the, my eyes into focus. Up here you can see some ancient ruins. So this is the ancient city of Sepphoris. We talked about Sepphoris a few weeks ago. It was the capital of the Galilee at the time of Herod, the time of Antipas. It's about 5 kilometres from Nazareth. So this is the Arab town of Sepphoris, where all the Arabs were driven out in 1948, and they now live in a suburb over here in Nazareth, and that suburb is called Safaria, because the Arabic word for Sepphoris is Safaria. So the Arabs from Sapori, as the Jewish people call it, were pushed out of Sepphoris, and the refugees were made welcome, even though they were 100% Muslim, they were made welcome by the Christians in Nazareth in 1948. Come and sleep on the lounge room floor, whatever, till you get established. As a result, Nazareth is now 2/3 Muslim, 1/3 Christian, because of the refugees coming in from around the Galilee. What do we have over here? What do you think that is?
So, barracks, are they?
That is the modern Israeli town of Sapori, Sepphoris. So next to the hill, which was Sepphoris in the 1st century, on the next hill over, they built a new town of Sepphoris, which in Hebrew is Zappori. But it looks like we're waiting. See how it's built? It's on the top of a ridge. You've got an outer circle of houses. You've got gardens and parkland for the kids in the middle. But these houses are built next to each other, so in effect it becomes a city wall. This is defensive civilian architecture. What you have to do if you're stealing somebody else's land, but the people are still there, and someday they're going to want their land back. You're just going to keep killing them forever, or you're going to make peace. Okay, so here you've got a modern Israeli town of Sepphoris. Scrambling down the side of the hill, you've got a pig's breakfast of houses with no urban planning. Streets you can barely, I remember clipping my reversing mirrors on telegraph poles as I drove up the street to a friend's house, because the streets are so narrow, and it was only a little tiny Suzuki. Okay, the streets are built for ox carts and donkeys, not for cars. And here you've got the ancient palace of Herod Antipas. Okay, there's a lovely valley, the Nahal stream of Amud, and Amud means column. So it's actually the Wadi Amud. Amud is the Arabic word for column. And so this is ancient valley running off from the Sea of Galilee, running off from about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock maybe. And it goes way up into the hills. And it was very fertile because of the rain coming to the water, coming down from the mountains. Back in Neolithic times, there were humans living here, back in the Stone Age. Okay, so there's all kinds of interesting archaeological work from that period of history in the Nahal or Wadi Amud. Again, beautiful trade. You see, the further north you get, the greener it gets, but the wilder it becomes in terms of landscape. Sea of Galilee finally makes an appearance. There's Tiberias, and that's probably a Jewish settlement, or Jewish neighbourhood. Settlements are on the West Bank, the neighbourhoods are on the rest of the country. And you see this is obviously a photo taken in February. not in July. And guess what? There are virtually no Arab living anywhere around the side of the Sea of Galilee, because in 1948 they were all moved on forcefully. Again, there's a whole group of people, Christians particularly, but not only Christians, from Tiberias, who relocated to Nazareth with the assistance and the organisation of a local Catholic priest, who then found that the forms his people had signed, which they had to sign to get a tiny government grant to start their home in Nazareth, which were written in Hebrew, actually said that they relinquish all claim to their own properties back in Tiberias. Dirty Tricks Department 101. He was a broken man when he was coming back. This is more familiar. You can see this is in winter, but it's a very different part of the country. This is freshwater, beautiful freshwater. So this is my country. So when we go to work on the dig's over here at Bethsaida. Capernaum is just next door, basically. Guinnessar, it's really this whole area here. All of this area here is a large Jewish kibbutz called Guinnessar, and Guinnessar in New Testament is Gennesaret. Same consonants, just different vowels. So in the late medieval, early modern period, this was sugarcane growing country, and now it's bananas and other intensive agricultural crops. But there are no Arab villages left anywhere around this side of the lake, because they've all been driven away because the Jewish people wanted that land. It's the best land, along with Jezreel. It's the best land and it's access to fresh water. So the Arabs are in the villages up in the hills, like Nazareth, which is not a village, we'll talk about it next week, and places like Cana, which you've heard about, and various other Arab villages. They're several miles back up into the hills. And I've commented to my friends, it's very generous how the Palestinians all gave their seaside properties to the Jews, and they said, we'll go and live up in the dusty hills, that's fine. We don't want any. We don't want any agricultural land, we don't want any fresh water. We'll just go and live up there. At Guinnessar, the crown jewels is this first century fishing boat, big enough for about 12 men. So you can imagine the way the tourists come to look at this. This is the hottest tourist object in Israel. We won't delay with that for now. I've got a friend who works on the restoration of that boat. We'd say Tagba, it's actually Tabarah, and that's the traditional site of the feeding of the 5,000. This is the lake, very beautiful. And again, the lake is dropping. Let's go back here. This area up here, this is called the Horns of Hatim. That's where the Muslim military commander, Salah ad-Din, you know, Saladin, that's where he defeated, absolutely destroyed the Crusader army on the 4th of July in 1187, and that was the end of the Crusades. And it was an ambush. The Christian army was on its way down to Tiberias from Nazareth, and it was July the 4th, and it's middle of summer. They didn't quite make it to Tiberias, and they decided to stop and make camp, and the Muslims just set fire to the grass. Horses panicked, men panicked, massive defeat. Crusaders never recovered. Okay. I can just see how you've got this incredible jaws, the mountain pass. And if you're in there and the enemy is in front of you and behind you and they set fire to the grass in July, all over Red Rover. Okay. So, interesting place, very significant place. This is around the Sea of Galilee. On the other side of the river, we're almost out of time. You've got the same landform as the northern part of Israel, basically. So we're going to go from north to south. Obviously, this is after the rain in the area called Gilead. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is one of the phrases coming out of the Bible. Again, you can see some of the. It's very similar to the land around Nablus, and it does get decent rain in the wet season. Other times of the year, this will be very bare. This is part of the ancient city of Jerash or Jeraza, one of the 10 towns of the Decapolis, and the modern town of Jerash is in the background. So this is all in Jordan, because we're no longer in Israel. And then we go way down to the south into Petra, one of my favourite places. That's because it's going through the Sikh, narrow. Again, the reason the place was there because the only way to get in was through this narrow mountain pass, which basically two people could defend. Okay, it's a magical place to go. Maybe we'll go there next year. A magical place, and you might just begin to see coming into view is this.
Oh,
Okay, or the Ghazni, which means treasure house. The early Europeans who first found it again in the middle of the 19th century, they thought this has to be a treasure house. It's actually a tomb. It's the tomb of King Aretas, king of Damascus, and because at that time the Nabateans ruled Damascus. This is the Aretas who tried to arrest Paul in the book of Acts. He's buried here. So the circle closes eventually. Interesting. I love this is it. But pock with bullet holes because British and other soldiers thinking if I can just crack one of these pots, maybe all these gold coins will come out. Okay, that it's now part of the World Heritage Area, but somewhat different control. But all of this is a facade; it goes nowhere, and under the steps is the burial place of Aretas. Okay, so outside the Holy Land, just a final wrap up. Let's go down to Sinai and to Jebel Musa. And Jebel Musa, of course, means Moses' mountain. Jebel Musa. Okay? So this is the scene in the Sinai Desert, hundreds of kilometres further south from Israel. This is what it looks like. And it is serious mountain desert country. Okay? These days there's a bitumen road because tourists. Tourists. Okay? There's even an airport. Moses would have given his magic stick for an airport. Okay. So just coming into view here is St. Catherine's Monastery. It's the oldest continuously used Christian church in the world. And the monks at Mount Sinai have been very, very clever. As you go in the monastery part, not the public part, as you go in the monastery part, there's a big sign up here in Arabic with a gold handprint from the Prophet Muhammad, totally fake, but telling the Bedouins who live round that the monastery is under his personal protection. And it's worked. Okay, it's worked for like 1400 years. So, good bit of thinking by the monks. There it is. And at the back is the so-called Jebel Musa, Mount Sinai. Little tiny monastery, the library at the back, and there's a church over here that the tourists go to. We stayed in the guest houses just here. And inside there's another little chapel. In the front of that chapel, where you'd expect the altar to be, is the burning bush. That's what they tell you it is, so it must be. You say, well, how did it get inside the church? Well, we trained it over the years, and it's slowly growing inside. There's no ash or anything, but it's the one, apparently. Do I sound just a little bit cynical? Fascinating place. The oldest copy of the Bible was found here. It's called Codex Sinaiticus, and it's the only book, physical book, to have survived from the Roman Empire to today. So, quite being the Bible, it's an incredibly important physical, not a copy of, it is a 4th century Bible, probably paid for by the Emperor Constantine. A little bit closer up view. When you get up on top, it's a bit of a walk, and it's high mountain desert. All right, so that hopefully gives you a bit of a sense that the how the place hangs together
when
physically.
why would you fight over it?
Well, exactly. I mean, come and I'll give you the land flowing with milk and honey. Can I get my check back, please?
Yeah.
Like, can I get my deposit back? Like, this is not exactly land flowing with milk and honey. Strategic, yes. But you can never do anything much with it. Now, Israel is because two major issues, three things. You have a highly committed, semi-disciplined, you can't really discipline Jewish people, but highly disciplined population who are committed to creating a new Jewish nation after 2,000 years. So they're highly motivated. Secondly, they've got masses of modern technology, the like of which the world has never seen. Thirdly, they're getting mega billions of dollars every year from the US. So there's three very, in other words, there's an empire far away which thinks this is a frontier location worth investing in because of oil. Okay?
But
And so it's flourishing.
it's like the Old Testament.
Oh,
It's-
yeah.
It's their land. They used to it. We look at that and we think, we compare it with the North Church.
Yeah.
You just can't, you haven't got the mindset.
Yeah.
Because you haven't lived
Sure. It is beautiful.
Yeah.
And I've spent enough time there.
So
And I've
then-
gone to enough corners of the country. I love it. I mean, there are kids at Petra who I know by name. They'll be a little bit older now, but I mean, next time I get there, I'll be married off. Sadly, I mean, they were 11 or 12 when I last saw them. They'll be married off in a year if they're not already. There is beauty in the place, but it's not the kind of place. It's not like I remember when Rome got control of Egypt, Egypt became the breadbasket for Rome. Palestine, Canaan, Israel, call it what you like. It's nobody's breadbasket. It's never going to produce such a surplus of essential food for human survival that people don't try and capture it for its own sake. Because it's become a religious place, a holy place. So the Crusaders went there not because they thought they were going to make a mozza out of growing sugarcane, which they did do. Okay, they went there because it was the Holy Land. It's where Jesus was born. It's where Jesus died. So they wanted to get it back from the Muslims. For the Muslims, it's the third. Jerusalem is the third holiest site after Mecca and Medina. And so for the Muslims, for the Palestinians in particular, whether Muslim or Christian, this is their city, this is their capital city, this is their holy land. And for the Jews, it's Eretz Yisrael, it's the land of Israel, the land
Everyone
promised to
wants
their
it.
fathers. And so the holy city, so hence the phrase in the Psalms, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, takes on a whole new ring because Jerusalem is a mess. Not just Jerusalem, I mean, the Holy Land is a mess.
Where's the Gaza Strip?
Gaza Strip is the bottom, very southern edge of those maps I was showing you earlier on. Okay. No, not the Dead Sea. It's on the coast. Gaza's on the Mediterranean. So when we talked about Gath, remember? One of these. No, we're still too far north. Hang on. There's a lot of photos here. Sorry about all those photos. Okay. This is Gath, you might remember. Gath.
Yes.
Not Garth, he's a guy. So Gath was one of the 5 cities of the Philistines, and another one of the 5 was Gaza. And Gaza has traditionally been the southern city in Palestine, and also the most northern, the northeast boundary of Egypt. Okay, and so in 1948, Egypt captured Gaza, but the people who were living in Jaffa, Joppa, same place, different languages. Jaffa was one of the largest cities in Palestine in 1948. It was basically 100% Arab, Palestinian. 2 weeks later, they were all locked up in concentration camps, surrounded in barbed wire, and the city was left empty, basically. Just a handful, a couple of thousand people escaped or survived. The rest of them were pushed down to Gaza and became part of the couple of million refugees squashed into Gaza. The highest population density on the planet is in the refugee camps in Gaza. 68,000 people per square kilometre, and that's a number from when I went there in 1990. So presumably it's totally out of date. The numbers will be much higher. 68,000, 70,000 in a square kilometre.
And it's purely to get their land.
Because Israel wants them out. Israel's strategy was this was the strategy of Ben Gurion, drive the Arabs out. And then you'll have a land without people for a people without land. Okay, well, it wasn't an empty land. Okay, the Jews were only 20%, if that, of the population, and most of them had only arrived in the last 50 years. And they bought up the land with money from America, but they didn't have enough. They didn't want an independent Palestine in 1948 because that would be 80% Palestinian, and they wouldn't control it. So they went to war, and they got 80% of the land, and they wanted mostly the good farming land, which they got. And they ended up with. They tried to expel all of the Arabs, including places like Nazareth, and the Canadian. There was a Canadian Jewish officer who was in charge of the battle for Nazareth. It wasn't a battle. They turned up because they weren't a regular Israeli army. They were irregular Jewish forces. They turned up on the top of the hill above Nazareth wearing Iraqi army uniforms. So the folks said, the Iraqis have come, you beauty, or something like that in Arabic. And they went up the hill to welcome them. Pop, 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 pop. Oh, actually, they're Jewish. Okay? So the men of Nazareth were given 30 minutes to surrender the city. I've got friends who were children at the time who described, this one particular lady describes looking out through the front window of her parents' house, watching the mayor and all the other senior men of the village walking up the street with a bed sheet tied to a broom. There was no battle. Okay, they surrendered. Now the orders from Ben Gurion were put them in trucks and drive them to Lebanon. And the Canadian officer in charge said, if we do that, the world will turn against us. And he held on. He didn't obey orders for 48 hours, which time word got out that Nazareth, the Christian city, was about to be captured, or had been captured and was about to be depopulated. And so Ben Gurion cancelled the order but fired the Canadian officer. He was court-martialed for disobedience. Okay? And Ben Gurion said in his diaries, and he actually tried to, we've got the cabinet papers, we've got the diaries, he tried to trigger an incident undertaken by Jewish undercover agents, which would look like the Arabs were revolting. I chose that word deliberately. Would look like the Arabs had started a military incident so that the Israeli army could go in and drive them out and not stop until they'd pushed them into Syria and Lebanon. And the cabinet wouldn't agree. And he said, you're going to regret this because in 50 years' time there's going to be too many Arabs left in the country. Okay. Well, now they represent 20% of Israel, but they represent 50% of the total country. And there's we'll talk about the Israeli-Palestine issue at some stage, but there's a problem, and I understand the Jewish people's desire to live there. It's their ancestral, it's the land where all their memories come from. I have no wish to go and live in Wales, where the Jenkses come from, but I can understand that if I was brought up differently, I might have a different attachment. I mean, Eve's Irish. She would love to be living in Ireland in some respect. But I also understand for the Palestinians who have also been there for at least the last couple of thousand years, and in actual case are probably the direct descendants of the Jews who used to live there 2,000 years ago. But in the meantime, they've all become Christian in the Byzantine period, and then after the Muslim conquest in 634 or whatever it was, they slowly, mostly became Muslim. And about 10% of them stayed Christian, and now it's down to a much smaller number. But they're the same people. Modern Israeli Jews and modern Palestinians are the same people. I mean, the DNA analysis demonstrates that. They're exactly the same group of people. They've got different identities. So this is a conflict between identity. It's not a conflict between two totally different groups of people. But it would be bad whichever way, but it's just doubly tragic that it's so this is this beautiful little bit of land. Not as beautiful as Lebanon, but much better than the Sinai Desert. Okay, much better than Jordan. Not as nice as Greece. So that's the kind of place it is. And like Greece, which was very mountainous, is very mountainous, so there was never any central government in Greece, remember, until the time of basically Alexander the Great and his father Philip, who unified the Greeks by conquering them from Macedon. That does it. Greeks themselves could never form a central government because everybody lived in their own valley.
Yeah.
Okay, and there's a bit of that going on in Israel as well. There's so many regions. In fact, one of the I think one of the most interesting proposals for a peace settlement is to divide the country up into about 12 different cantons, like Switzerland. Some of them would be 100% Palestinian, some of them would be 100% Jewish, some of them would be mixed. But in their own canton, their own local government area, they do what they want. Want to have Jewish law, want to have Muslim law, whatever. And then you have a central parliament, which is for the whole country, and is not a Jewish parliament, but is a national parliament. Now that's an idea from Jewish peace proposals, but nobody wants it. That's for another day. All right.